Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to this week's Facebook Live session. Got some really good updates today, and there's been a really good announcement from the Chancellor, and there's quite a few things that I want to go through that I think will be of real interest to people today. So, how it works is, as usual, as every week, really well subscribed, and if you've got any questions, anything you want to ask whatsoever, just feel free to just pop a question in as a comment, and I'll work through some updates at the beginning, and then I'll move to those questions as I get a bit further on. So if you can just pop them in there, and we'll let them build up, and then I'll move from the beginning bit into those questions. So how I'm going to do it today is we'll talk through what some updates are, some things that have happened this week which are really important for businesses, and then we'll move on to some FAQs, some things that I didn't get to answer from last week. We get so many questions in a session. People give us a call afterwards, and people send in questions to us afterwards, and we'll deal with that. And then I'll move on to the open Q&A session. And please feel free to pop anything that you want into there. So we've been so well subscribed to this, and what's been happening is after these sessions, we've had contact from businesses, business owners to say, can I have a little bit more information on this? Can I ask a few more questions that maybe didn't get answered in the session, or can I have a bit more information because this all sounds great, this is all the really good information, but I'd like to know a little bit more about you could come and help my business, and Krona can do that as well. So we've got a phone number and we've got an email address for anyone who wants to contact us. The phone number is 0800 046 3179, and the web address is krona.co.uk/FB Live. So if you want any more information from us, you want to ask a question which didn't get answered today, just pop on there, put it in for us, and we'll get back to you. We'll help you with that. So let's move on to the updates. And update number one, which I'm sure that everybody will have seen, was the update that we got from the Chancellor on Friday. We got clarification, and there were changes to the job retention scheme. This is the first big change we've really had to the job retention scheme, and it's clarified somewhat, not completely, and I'll talk about why not completely, but it's clarified somewhat what's going to change and the dates of what's going to change as well. So a few things that I picked up from what the Chancellor said, and I'm going to set these out in really simple, easy to understand terms for everybody. If you feel like this is you like it in a bit of context for your business, or you'd like me to explain it a little bit further, just feel free to ask a question about it. I'm sure a few people are going to ask questions about this today, but I'll set it out as plainly as I can and what you need to think about as a business owner and how this affects your business and what you can claim under this scheme. So the first point that I thought was really important, and not only did we have the announcement the Chancellor made, he had the Q&A that he got after it himself as well. And what was pretty clear from that was that the scheme's going to close at the end of October. The scheme was extended, and it was extended until the end of October. And the question was whether or not that would or wouldn't be extended again. He even got asked about if there was a second spike, would we have another furlough scheme similar to the one that we're on at the moment. And what was clear from that is that will close at the end of October 2020, and there'll be no more of an extension to the scheme. What was important, though, was that they brought in, and I've spoke about this in previous sessions, a more flexible furlough scheme, which is what earlier on we were saying we really needed. Businesses were saying to me they really needed. And as we moved through those sessions, the government gave us an indication that's what they were going to announce. They've said that this is going to start from the 1st of July. So in previous sessions when I've spoke about this, I've always spoke about the 1st of August, because that's the date the government were originally looking at bringing it in, the 1st of August. They've moved that forward now. That's going to be the 1st of July, and that's when we're going to get this new flexible scheme. I'll go on to talk about the rules of this scheme a little bit and what we know so far. There's going to be more information coming out shortly on this. But what we need to think about as businesses is, do our employees qualify under this new scheme? This is something really important, something that the Chancellor mentioned when he gave out the new rules of how this is going to work. So what we need to think about with this is that somebody who is going to be able to claim under this scheme, so how the scheme works is that you've got an employee and you've got maximum flexibility is what it says. They're going to flesh this out a bit in a bit more information, which they're going to issue on the 12th of June. But the 12th of June is 2 days later than a very relevant date. Okay, I'll explain to you why that's so relevant. So the guidance that we have at the moment tells us that it's maximum flexibility for employers. And what we had under the current furlough scheme, where we're at the moment, and don't fall foul to think this new scheme's in place yet, it's not, is that there's three simple things that we need to adhere to make sure that an employee is furloughed. One is that they don't undertake any work, they don't provide services, they don't generate revenue. Two is that it's for a minimum period of 3 weeks. And three, it's that it's due to situations arising out of coronavirus. But they're the prerequisites we need to do to place somebody on a period of furlough. That's still the same now. The thing that's going to change come the 1st of July is the work part of it. An employee from the 1st of July can return to work and still claim for furlough. You can't claim for the same day. And the example that the Chancellor gave was that he said that an employee can return to work for 2 days a week, and we can claim under the job retention scheme as businesses for the other 3 days of that week. That's if that employee works a 5-day week. So that's the flexibility we get as employers. But what if I've got an employee at the moment who isn't on furlough, and I think I'm going to hang on to them for a bit, and then when we get the flexible scheme, I'm going to put them onto that flexible scheme, then and put them onto 3 days. We can't do that. The employee already needs to be on the furlough scheme. They already need to be entered onto it. They already need to be under the job retention scheme. We already need to have had that employee registered on there. And the date that we have to have that done by now, there's a deadline, is the 10th, so a week today. So by the 10th, if you've got an employee who you want to be tapered off, and that's the purpose of this, to taper employees off and bring them back to work, is that they need to be on the scheme by that point. Now, there's a little bit of ambiguity here, because it said that if an employee was entered onto the scheme, so reading that could mean that someone who was furloughed in March would have been on the scheme before the cut-off. They don't actually have to have been on at the point at the 10th. Now, the government isn't clear on that, and the issue here is that the guidance about how this works is coming out on the 12th, 2 days after the cut-off. So the best bet for employers here is, if you want somebody to be relevant to the new flexible furlough scheme, is to have them furloughed by the 10th of this month. That's the safest bet, and we'll see clarification on that, and I'll give an update when we get the new information on the 12th. But that's how it stands. That's how it stands at the moment. The other thing that we need to think about is the reduction in what we can claim back under the job retention scheme. That's changing. And when the Chancellor explained this, and I've spoken to a few businesses about this, there's a little bit of confusion about this. And I think the simplest way to explain it is to say that what the employee gets under the scheme, which is 80% of their salary, unless you've got them at 100%, you've agreed to do that. We'll talk about the fact that you can bring it down, but let's talk about a minimum of 80%. That the employee continues to receive 80%. What you as a business pay to your employee at 80% is not changing. That does not change until the end of October. If you keep them on furlough, that stays exactly the same. But it's what you can claim back from the government under the coronavirus job retention scheme. That's what's reducing. So for June and for July, continue to claim back what you were claiming back before. You can continue to claim back the 80% of the 2,500. That's what we can do. That's changing in August. And I thought from August they would say 20% from August. That's what I was anticipating. But from August, employers to pay the NI and pension contributions, which they were previously claimed for, still claim up to 2,500. September, employers to pay 10%, and more importantly, thinking here, claim back 70. So you pay the employee 80, you can only claim back 70 from the government. So you're paying 10, whether the employee's back or not, you're paying 10. Employers can pay, and then to pay 20% from October and claim back 60. And think about how that's going to tie into the flexible scheme. You're going to have employees who are working for 2 days a week. They will be paid full pay from the employer for those 2 days a week. We think that's not yet been clarified by the government. We should get that clarified on the 12th. But we don't think that'll be 80% pay, because it should tie in the same as annual leave. It's nothing to do with the furlough scheme. It's to do with them actually coming back to work and being paid. So they'll be paid full pay for those 2 days they work, and then the other 3 days you would claim under the job retention scheme, 80% going down to 70%, going down to 60%, but they keep remaining to be paid 80%. So hope that clarifies that the changes, they were the key things that the Chancellor came up with. And the purpose of this is to encourage people to come back to work, is to encourage businesses to get their employees back from furlough. The scheme can't go on forever. And rather than just cut it off at a point, that there's a nice phase and stage basis to get people back into work. Now, that scheme adversely affects a certain pool of businesses, though. There's a certain pool of businesses who fall foul of this. These are the businesses who won't be open in August, won't be open in September, won't be open in October. They don't have an open date yet. A lot of businesses are back. There's rules around that, but you think about bars, restaurants, salons, beauty, hair, accommodation, hospitality. I know we've got the different stages that we need to be at with the country, but there's no date back for those yet. And I've been speaking to a few restaurants and pubs over the last week or so, since this came out on Friday, who are concerned about this, saying that this is a difficult position for my business. I've only got enough to just cover the salaries from what I'm getting back from the government. That's neutral for me. And I'm just managing to stay afloat and keep my head above water through this period. And now all of a sudden, what we're having to claim back is reducing when my employees can't return to work. And this is fine for industries where you've got employees coming back on a part-time basis, on phasing their workforce back, and their trades coming up and they're taking in revenue and they're selling again. But for the industries that don't have people coming back yet, that was a criticism of this. It wasn't sector specific as well. But that's something that isolates out those industries. And from the advice that we've been getting asked about this week, and I've got an FAQ about this that I'll cover in more detail, is they want to look at some other options now. The furlough scheme has become much less attractive than it was before. You paid your employees 80, you claim back 80. That was cost neutral for you as a business. Yeah, you had a cash flow issue, but that was cost neutral for you from what you could claim back. That's now evolved onto a point where that proposition is less attractive. So in businesses that we're speaking to are looking at a couple of different options now. They're looking at redundancy. They're looking at layoff. They're looking at periods of unpaid leave. And that's, for some businesses and small businesses especially, that's a necessity that they need to consider as well. The second thing that I thought was a really interesting update that I wanted to go through, and for me, a really, on the face of it, straightforward area, but in actual HR terms and health and safety terms, a really complicated area is the children going back to school. So schools have been open for the whole period of time throughout COVID. For children of key workers, vulnerable children, they've been going in. There's been a small amount of people allowed to have their children at schools, but reception, year 1 and year 6 were allowed to go back as of Monday. So this was about 10 weeks that they've been away from school for. And what was really interesting was that as of Tuesday, the head teachers were reporting between 40 and 70% of children returned. And it's not all schools who have opened either. Had some really interesting numbers here. National Federation of Educational Research showed 46% of children will be kept at home. 50% of children in disadvantaged areas will be kept at home. 25% of teachers, really interesting, are likely to be absent due to health issues and for themselves, for protecting individuals that they're with. So the concern that people have at the moment with this situation is that that's a highly high chance area of contracting the virus. That I don't know if anyone has children, but when you see those children who are trying to follow social distancing rules, especially young children, it can be difficult. It can be difficult for them to follow it the same as an adult was. And they're thinking it's going to be very difficult to administer that. And also to throw into the mix as well, that think about the individuals who've had their children at school and who currently have their children at school, key workers, people who are at a higher level of exposure to the virus. Say if they work in the NHS, they're at a high level of exposure to that virus with their children mixing with other people's children, and people think that that's giving them a higher chance of contracting the virus. So they've decided not to let their children into school. So that's anybody's right to do that. It's anybody's right to feel like that, and a lot of schools themselves aren't opening for that reason. This leaves us in a bit of a difficult employment law situation, a HR situation as business owners, though, that we're in a position where we're saying to employees, and think about this as an employee who you need them in their role, you want them back into work, you need them in their role, that you say to them, okay, we can't come back to work because I've had childcare issues. So you might have taken the option as a business to furlough that employee because yes, you needed them in work, but they couldn't come into work because of coronavirus, because the schools weren't open, they didn't have any other childcare, they'd be on a period of furlough, they might be on unpaid leave, but say most people are saying they're putting them on a period of furlough. And now you're saying, great, we've been waiting for the schools to come back, call you up and I say, please that schools are back today. Looking forward to you coming into work Monday. We know the schools are open Monday. I'm sure you've got Monday, but we expect you in Monday mid-morning. And the employee says to you, I'm not sending my children back to school. I don't think it's safe to send them back to school. That's a question that we've been coming up against quite a bit this week. And different businesses wanted to take different approaches with those employees. But you've got a very volatile situation there where you're going to have friction between two groups because the employers have been waiting for that school date. Their employees are allowed to take children back to school. So they want their employees back. They need them. But you've got parents, on the other hand, who are saying this doesn't feel safe. That's more important to me than anything, that my child is safe. And in my opinion, I don't feel that's a safe environment for them, and the chance of contracting the virus, and maybe other members of my family as well. And the difficulty we've got here is that both parties are right in that situation. That's an opinion that they've got, but we need to think about this as what options we've got as a business in that situation. And that's where you want to get into a conversation with employees to see if we can talk about when this is going to resolve, when there's going to be a timescale on it, if we can then move to another option and think about, well, is furlough no longer an option I want to agree to? An employer can remove the right to that at any point. Is that something they don't want to agree to anymore? Do they want to think about a period of unpaid leave? Do they want to think about maybe a phased return and some part-time hours? And that's going to look really attractive under the new scheme as well. So a few options there as well for people to think about. But that I thought was a really interesting update, and something which is a really complicated area as well. One other area that I thought was really interesting, that came up from a conversation I had with a gentleman last week, was about a period of unpaid leave and how unpaid leave works and how that changed from what came out in the Treasury direction. So you could have an employee who's on a period of unpaid leave, say a sabbatical. Employee says, I want to take some time away from work. I'm going to take 6 months off, take some time away from work, collect my thoughts, I'm going to come back better and stronger at the end of this year. Or you've had some employees who've said, since the coronavirus situation arose, post the beginning of March, before we had the job retention scheme, or they've just said, right, I want to go on a period of unpaid leave, I want to be out of the office, I just want to go on a period of unpaid leave, and we'll deal with that rather than shielding, rather than anything else. And we've agreed to that, and what can we do? What can we do in that situation? And the gentleman I spoke to this week had a fantastic insight, very well read on the situation, knew the Treasury direction very well himself. But what we do as a business is help them with the application of that and how those rules work. And the rules around that are that there's two camps here. That people who were on a period of unpaid leave before the 1st of March, we need to wait for that period of unpaid leave to end, the restrictions around that in the Treasury direction, to wait for that unpaid leave to end. But people who went on a period of unpaid leave after the 1st of March, we can agree with them. There's no restrictions on prohibiting an agreement there. To agree with those employees to end that period of unpaid leave and come back. But bear in mind, it's when the period of leave starts. So the restrictions are on leave which happen prior to the 1st of March. And then last thing I had before we move into some questions is that I had some questions that we didn't get a chance to answer last week. And now at the beginning of the session, I spoke about somewhere where people can send questions into as well. That those questions get put here, and we've got ability to answer those questions as well. So I've got 3 questions here which I thought were really good questions, and ones that I thought would help people. Maybe we'll get a couple more questions about this and kind of flesh them out a bit maybe in this session. But the first one was, we want staff to complete training, but some don't want to, as we're not paying them. So why should they? They're at 80%. Well, what the government guidance says on training is that employees should be encouraged to undertake training. It says that. So if an employee is on a period of training while they're furloughed, like I spoke about before, the current rules are they can't work. It's very clear. Training is not classified as work. Just make sure that training doesn't creep over to being work. And highest risk one being delivering a service to the business. But as long as that doesn't creep over into being work, then we're okay with training, and they're encouraged to do training. And in a perfect world, we speak to the employee, we ask them to do training, and they do the training. A little caveat to this, just to remember for a lower paid employee, is that training attracts national minimum wage, whereas the 80% of their salary under the job retention scheme doesn't. So you might have to top up a bit of salary there for a lower paid employee if they do training. Just bear that in mind. But let's say for this example that they're not. And the employee is saying, well, I'm sat at home on furlough, I'm getting paid 80% anyway, I wouldn't get paid any more if I came in and did training, so no, I don't want to do training. And that's what's happened with this business here. So what are the options that we've got available? Now, obviously, option number 1, the first option, is that I would speak to the individual. I'd speak to the individual in a much firmer way to say that if they don't come in and do the training, I'm saying that's a reasonable management instruction. And if they don't follow that reasonable management instruction, then I'm going to be looking to invoke the company's disciplinary processes in relation to that. And then if that's that situation, that conversation doesn't get them to come in and do the training, which hopefully they would see sense and it would, what you need to look at then as a business is what terms and conditions you've got in place between you and your employees. What you want to see is what does the disciplinary process say? And a lot of disciplinary processes will have something along the lines of a reasonable management instruction. Failure to follow a reasonable management instruction being a conduct issue. So if it did get to a situation where even with the call and the conversation, the employee said, well, no, I'm not coming back, it's your move next, then I would look to the disciplinary process. I would look to discipline that employee for failure to follow a reasonable management instruction. I don't think we could get reasonably say that would be anything further than a warning, but I think that would be something that I would look at pursuing and issuing with that employee, dependent on what the terms and conditions stated as well. Another question which ties into a little bit of something that I said before was, and this advice has been coming in a little bit more since the announcement and since the changes, was, can I make an employee redundant who's currently on furlough, as what I can claim back under this scheme is reducing? Think about the industries that this is most relevant to: bars, restaurants, salons, hairdressers, hospitality, accommodation, all the areas where we don't yet have a this is the day I'm coming back date. And they're all pooled in with everybody else, all the other businesses who are back in work in some way, some back, everybody's back, some they're kind of in the middle. And it's those industries which are really thinking about this as a real big, heavy impact on them. For the same reasons that I set out before, for the fact that they've still got to pay the employees 80%, but what they can claim back is reducing, and they might be in very, very small margins at the moment about keeping these businesses afloat, and where they're going to get this money from to be able to do that. So they're looking at other options now. And other businesses as well, if you don't have 100% of your workforce back, and you still have people on furlough, and still people are going to go on to reduce furlough, what you're going to claim under that scheme is going to reduce as well. And that's something that businesses are thinking about. I'm thinking, well, can I have a look at some other options here? What else can we do? And when I've spoken in previous sessions, I've always spoke about, you've always had the ability to make an employee redundant. You've always had the ability to place an employee on short-time working or layoff. Now that's dependent on you having a relevant, an up-to-date short-time working and layoff clause as well. But as long as we've got that up to date, we can look at those options. A period of unpaid leave, if agreed with the employee, we can have a look at that option as well. And also, if you have a contract which allows you to vary the hours, that's another option you can look at as well. So you've got a few options available there. And what you always think about with these options is, if there's a dismissal at the moment, the notice pay, as long as it's not paid in lieu, there's nothing in the scheme which prohibits notice pay from being recovered under the job retention scheme. So if you had an employee who was made redundant, and then you had that period of notice which was served, and they were furloughed for that period, then there's nothing which stops us being able to claim that back under the job retention scheme. And businesses thinking about cash flow being a big issue at the moment as well. But with that situation, it's about those businesses thinking about the reasonableness of that decision. And this was something that I always warned people about before, that yes, you could make people redundant before. There's nothing that stops you being able to make people redundant now. There's nothing that makes you able to dismiss anyone for any of the fair reasons at the moment. But redundancy is one that I think about, because with redundancy, you always had the question of, was there a suitable alternative to redundancy when you took that decision to make an employee redundant? And the suitable alternative that we had before, and we still have, is the job retention scheme. So the job retention scheme is an alternative to redundancy, and one that needs to be considered. So that was always something that I always caveated that advice with, was we've not had that tested in court yet. We've not seen a case on that. We don't know how it's going to be interpreted by the tribunals if it gets there. But bear in mind, there's another one in the mix now. The job retention scheme is an option. And if you've got an employee who you can claim 80% payback for, and you pay them 80% pay, it's likely that's going to be seen as a suitable alternative. However, this scheme just got less attractive. What you can claim under this scheme just reduced. It becomes less attractive, and in turn that becomes a less suitable alternative to redundancy, because before it was seen as something that was likely to be suitable. You pay them 80, you claim back 80. But when you get into the point where we're paying them 80 and we're claiming back 60, and my business might not even be open yet, that's not as much of a suitable alternative to redundancy that we had before. And that's obviously on a case-by-case basis. Obviously think about the rules that you've got in place and the policies that you have in place for redundancy and processes, and think about consultation and selection, discrimination, all those issues which tie into any unique situation when it comes to redundancy. I'm talking about principles here, and in principle, that's an option which I'm not surprised this question has come in, is that a lot of businesses are looking at now with the tapering down of this scheme. The third thing that we had was a question about annual leave. So a question about annual leave: what happens to an employee's annual leave accrual under the new part-time furlough scheme? So I'm a business and I bring somebody back 2 days a week and I keep them furloughed for 3 days a week. How does annual leave accrual work in that situation? And simply the answer to this is it's exactly the same as it was before. That an employee accrues annual leave while they're on furlough. They always did that. They accrue annual leave at their full rate, not at 80%. They accrue leave at their full rate. And they're going to continue to accrue leave at the same rate when they come back to work. So even though they'll have a split, some days will be working, some days will be furlough, they still accrue leave at the full 5 days of that week. If you've got an employee who, and this is kind of a subtle one, if you've got an employee who has over the statutory minimum, which is 5.6 weeks of annual leave a year, you can agree with that employee to reduce that down as well. And the same with anything with this, that we can always agree to vary somebody's contract. We agree to put them on furlough. We agree to reduce their pay to 80%. We can agree to reduce their annual leave down as long as it doesn't go below the statutory minimum, as long as it doesn't go below national minimum wage. So 5.6 weeks. The national minimum wage point is fine for the 80%. So they were all the updates that I thought were really interesting from last week and a couple of the questions that we got as well. And if I just move on to the Q&A now, I'll just jump through the questions and feel free to pop anything that you want in there. So first question from Jenny. Hi, we would like to offer staff online training whilst on furlough. Some required and some optional. Do we have to pay a top up for the time spent? If so, can we say it should take a certain time to complete? Okay, so I'll deal with that point first. There's another little question after that as well. I'll deal with that point first. So training while somebody's on furlough is absolutely fine. We don't have to pay them any more while they're on furlough. We don't have to top them up to 100% while they're on furlough. But the only thing that you do have to pay them differently while they're training if they're on furlough is national minimum wage. If what you're paying them at 80% divided by their normal hours a week is above national minimum wage, then you're fine. You don't have to pay them any more. But if what you're paying them at the 80% on the furlough pay is less than national minimum wage, just for the time that they're training, they need to be paid national minimum wage for those hours. So you don't have to top them up to 100%. It only applies where you've got an employee whose furlough pay is actually less than national minimum wage. And also, can a staff member who's a manager also on furlough administer, or does that count as working? I would say yes, that counts as that counts as working. Bear in mind, there's no clear, definitive set of rules around what is or isn't working. That's my opinion on how I think that would be interpreted. But yeah, if you had somebody who's arranging a training session and dealing with employees, administering and things like that, I think there's a good chance, there's a good risk that will be seen as working while on furlough. Okay, Jackie, we're currently rotating staff on a 3-week cycle. So 3 weeks working, 3 weeks furlough. Will we still be able to do this after the 30th of June? That's a good question. There's nothing so far which says that rotation is going to end. There's nothing that says that rule is going to change. We'll get clarification on this on the 12th. That's when the new piece of legislation clarifying this comes out. But my answer as of today is yes, you can keep doing that. There's nothing in the legislation which says, or the guidance that says you can do, you can't do that. But that might change. That might change next week. But my view on that, my opinion would be that yes, you're still going to be likely to be able to do that. Okay, Lee, if someone was put onto furlough before the 10th of June, could they then be on and off the scheme whilst it's running? On and off the scheme whilst it's running, e.g. on furlough on June, off for July, back for August. I think the same as the previous question. My thought at the moment is yes, they can. I think they just need to have been on the scheme at the point that we move over to the new scheme. But like I said, the unfortunate thing with this is that the guidance is coming out 2 days after the cutoff. But I would have thought that yes, you could have it where I don't think you would have to keep somebody on at least 1 day of furlough a week to be able to say that that employee can never in the future again be furloughed. But it might be the case that if you have them doing 1 5-day week, you might have to wait another 3 weeks, even at 1 or 2 days a week, before you can claim again back under the scheme, and they'll clarify how that's going to work. Okay, James, question: What do I do if staff say no to returning to work? This is something that we've seen quite a bit of, and this is something that is such a delicate HR and health and safety area. And my advice on this straight away, I'll move on to the answer to this question, but my advice on this straight away is that the thing that you have to sort out as a business, thing you have to resolve, and that we're helping a lot of businesses with at the moment, is making sure that your workplace is COVID secure. that you've followed all the rules that are set out in the health and safety guidelines, that you've done your brand new risk assessment, that you've followed everything on the 5-point guide that we should be doing, and making sure that business is secure. And for me, that's number 1 to 5 on the list. That's everything. You need to make sure that is done before you do anything, because there's going to be situations here with businesses where employees are going to refuse to return to work because they don't feel like their health and safety is secure. And we have a problem with that as employers. Another thing for us to consider is that gives them a certain amount of extra protection under the Employment Rights Act, that they can't suffer a detriment, they can't be dismissed due to saying that they don't feel that a place is health and safety secure, they feel there's a health and safety risk. That's something that we need to consider as well. And what happens off the back of that? Is it a detriment? Is that not a detriment? Is that something that's reasonable? Is it reasonable to say, well, we're not going to pay, you're going to go into unpaid leave then? Is that a detriment due to them raising that issue and due to them not feeling safe to come back into work? This is a case-by-case situation. It's a very difficult area. We're getting a lot of advice about this at the moment, looking into all the situations and complexities of each business and how that works. But you are going to get this. Business owners are going to get this, and people feel that, and that's their right. They feel like they don't feel comfortable coming into work, and that's their right, and that's what we as business owners have to deal with, and we have to handle that. And if you've got a member of staff who's refusing to return to work, you've kind of got a range of options. Number 1 is you leave them on furlough. That's option number 1. You leave them on a period of furlough. As long as we can hit the rules of the furlough, we leave them on furlough and claim for them under the job retention scheme. Now, for a lot of businesses that I'm speaking to, that operationally just doesn't work. That doesn't work for them because they need these people back into work. It's not going to work with these people just being off for a long period of time. So what they want to do is they think, well, that option doesn't work great for me, and I feel like if I do that, everyone else is going to do that, and then there's going to be no business for me to run. I've got contracts, I need to be able to service these contracts. I've got no other option. I need these people back to work. You can look at some other options then. We can look at a period of unpaid leave, which is agreed with the employee, which obviously, again, from different to furlough, it's going to give you that incentive for the employee to return because they're not getting paid, but it's going to increase the risk, as I spoke about before, about the fact that they don't feel safe coming back to work. We need to look at whether they can work from home in that situation. If they can't, then you need to look at the increased risk that you've got with that option. And then you've got an option even further on from that, where you want to say, right, okay, we want to start disciplining employees to say, this is a reasonable management instruction. I've done my risk assessment. We've had professionals in to do it. We've helped them with it. It's absolutely top drawer. They're happy with it, and they want to go for a stricter measure and deal with it like that. Now, that's an option that businesses have available, but it's an option which attracts much more risk than the other options. And that's just something they need to think about when they're going down each one of these options. Some are lower risk, but they don't get the result they want for the business. And we advise on that. We'll advise on that exact situation and how to balance that throughout each option. But with any of those 3 options, anything at all, number 1 on the list is that the health and safety is done. It's up to scratch. You've had professional help with it, and that's been completed. And that's for any business, for any problem that's going to come up for the rest of this calendar year, really, is we need to make sure that that's all done. We've had an increase of 14 million in the funding to the HSE from the government. And for that, they're going to be going out and looking at businesses who aren't complying with what they should be doing under the government rules, and rightly so. And the HSE are going to be getting involved. There's going to be fee for intervention. There's going to be increased investigations. And they're going to be looking into businesses who aren't complying with the new rules. So that's my thought on the whole of a situation if staff says no to returning to work. Complex area. No option on itself is the ideal option. All options have got ups and downs to them, but that's upon consideration with that business and how that business wants to do it, and appreciation of the risks that are attached to each option as well. Okay, Lewis, with the new rules on job retention scheme, what's the latest date I can put my employees on furlough? The 10th of this month. There is kind of 2 schools of thought on this between lawyers and people I've been speaking to, is that if they were on the scheme already a while back, they're on it. If they've been on it for 3 weeks back in March, you're fine. Other schools of thought, which I would fall into the second camp on this, would be that they have to be furloughed. They have to be furloughed on the 10th. They have to be furloughed at the time the new scheme comes into play. I'm not saying the second option's right. I'm saying that there's the guidance is vague on this, and I know that's the safest option. The second option we're almost certainly going to be fine on as a business. The first option we might not be, and that's why I would lean towards a business. Just appreciating those 2. and steering towards the risk, which I think is lower for their business. And then we're going to get clarification on the 12th. And if it ends up being the second option, and if you were off in March for 1 to 3 weeks, you can't claim under the scheme, you needed to be at that point, well, then that's it. They can't put people back on the scheme. The scheme's done. No new people can go onto it, and that the horse has bolted on it then. So that's the advice we're giving to businesses, that they can appreciate the risk on those two. Okay, Mark Jane. So shops are opening in June. So it's going to be a week on Monday. It was saying non-essential retail is opening. And we have a deputy manager who does not want return from furlough due to caring for an 8-year-old. Okay, so this is a childcare situation, I assume, rather than they're saying that the health and safety, the risk assessment wasn't completed properly, everything at the shop wasn't right. So it's childcare. We've furloughed her until the end of June, and following that, 2 weeks of unpaid parental leave, as we don't have to extend furlough, do we? No, you don't. Furlough is agreed between both parties. So if you don't want to agree to it, you're not on furlough. And if the employee says, I don't agree to being furloughed, you can't furlough them. It needs to be agreement between both parties. Her grandparents normally look after the child, and she says she does not trust anybody else, but it's a key role and will have an impact. I feel we've been reasonable. What do you suggest? Well, sounds reasonable. And you've got a few options of what you want to do in that situation, Jane. You could say that I'm just going to extend the furlough period and keep you on furlough. Guessing that doesn't work for you as deputy manager is essential to your business. They're opening again. We need people back in work. So maybe that option isn't one for you. I assume it's not. You've got the option to say we're going to extend the period of unpaid leave to give them an incentive to return to work. And then you've also got the option to say that this is a reasonable management instruction now. I think you do have an alternative, and I'm going to move to disciplinary. But bear in mind that stricter option attracts a lot of risk, discrimination risk as well. Okay, can we furlough an employee? This is from Michelle. Can we furlough an employee on annual leave who's going on maternity leave from the 1st of July? So yes, you can furlough an employee who's on a period of annual leave. It's the same process we go through. Agree that with the employee. Make sure this is done before the 10th. But agree that with the employee, we can do that. The second part is, and they're also going on maternity leave from the 1st of July. So they can't be furloughed while they're on maternity leave. They're either on furlough or they're on maternity leave. They're either on one or the other. And if it seems quite a good option, it seems quite an attractive option to say, I'm going to agree with the employee for maternity period to end. This is usually when it's towards the end of it. For maternity period to end, or to not put them onto paternity, we're going to deal with this and agree, and we're going to go into the job retention scheme. The problem with this is that once the job retention scheme's over, they can't go back onto maternity. That they get one chance to go onto maternity, and that they have that option. If they don't do that, and they can't come back from a period of maternity onto the job retention scheme, onto furlough, then back onto maternity, they'd go back onto a period of unpaid leave or paid leave, whatever you as a business agreed with them if they wanted that childcare as well. So that'd be something I'd be thinking about when it comes to a pregnant employee. Okay, Lynn, this is a really good question. I think this is something that a lot of businesses will be thinking about. If staff come back to work for less hours, which they're able to do, which is now from July rather than August, they brought that forward, so now they're able to do that from July. We've got flexibility as business owners on that. Can you ask them to take a number of hours or days holiday each week for a period of time that can then be claimed back through the furlough scheme? So think about the principles here of what we can do while on the furlough scheme. So someone accrues annual leave, we know that. We also have the right under the working time regulations to force an employee to take a period of leave, as long as we give them double the notice of the leave they're about to take. Now, we could do that before furlough, we could do that during furlough. And I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that when they're on a mix of the two, because under both, you could do that before. So as long as we give the employer, obviously what I think the best thing from a business perspective is to try and agree that with the employees first, try and agree for them to take some leave. But what businesses don't want is they don't want to be returning after this period to a big bulk of untaken annual leave for employees that have been sat there on furlough for a period of months. And a lot of businesses are doing now is looking at getting those employees to encourage them to take the leave. If not, we're requiring them to take the leave. And as long as we give them double the notice of the leave they're going to take, and the government have clarified that that's fine as well, as long as we give them double the notice of it, then that's what we're doing with business. And I don't see that being any different when we come back to the part-time scheme. Okay, Sarah. Hi, if someone has been on furlough and now has work until after the 10th of June, will they be able to use the furlough scheme? Like I said before, maybe. The guidance comes out on the 12th. My advice would be, if you definitely want to use that scheme for that individual, and you can handle them not being in at all for a period of 3 weeks, and you want to take advantage of that scheme, then I would be saying that you need to do that before the 10th to make sure that that's something you can claim for. It might be fine. It might be fine if they were on the scheme previously, but that'd be the safest bet to ensure that you can claim under the scheme. Okay, Leanne, could you clarify the rolling over of annual leave? So they brought in new rules about the rolling over of annual leave for another couple of years after that leave year, as if it wasn't reasonably practicable to take it within that leave year. Given a little bit more guidance, fleshed out a little bit what reasonably practicable means as well, about the business you're in, about if it comes back and it's really busy, how reasonable is it for them to take leave in that period? I think that the key here is, while we've still got a period of time while these employees are on furlough, that we look as a business to try and get them to take some of that leave while they're on a period of furlough, so they don't come back with a big bulk. You're within your own rights as a business to handle that how you want to handle it, though. And you could let them come back with a full bulk, and you could let them roll that over for the next couple of years as well. This guidance on this was brought in more, I think, to be concerned with key workers and people who were desperately needed for this fight over this period, and weren't people who could come and take their leave. They were back and working, we needed them working. But this is open to all employees, and you're in a situation where the best thing to do is to get them to have taken the leave over that period, or they take leave when they get back, rather than get into a bit of a battle with them when it gets later in the year, where you're saying, well, I'm not going to roll your leave over. You either use it by the end of the calendar year, if that's your leave year, use it by the end of the calendar year, or it's gone. Because we say it was reasonably practicable for you to have taken it within that leave year. I think that's a much nicer conversation to have with an employee. Had you set your stall out quite early? I would set my stall out now, set your stall out in June about what that situation is. If we're requiring to take leave, let's get them to do that now. Let's set that out with them so we don't get in that position. But if, as a business, you're happy with them to roll it over for 2 years, it might work better for you. You've got that option as well. Okay, there's just another couple of questions here about the 10th of June deadline. I'm just thinking of these come in since I've answered those questions. Okay, Lorna, I think this one's a little bit different. I'll answer this one. I have a member of staff finishing maternity leave at the end of June, but I can't put her on furlough unless she's ended by the 10th of June. That is right. What do I do with her? Okay, we've got a few options. What we can do with that employee is we could agree for them to end their period of maternity leave if they wanted to. They'd end it earlier. They'd end it earlier this month, before the 10th, and then we could put them onto the furlough scheme. Then, if we agree that with them, they're back, they'd be returned to work, and then they'd be agreed to place on a period of furlough. We could look at that. The other thing is they could come back after their period of maternity leave, and we could agree with them to come back to work. We might need them back in work. That's another option. We could agree a period of unpaid leave with them. We could agree a period of paid leave with them. All of those options attract different risk, and some work for the business, some don't. But they're the options that we've got available. Just bear in mind, once they come back from maternity leave, they can't go back on maternity leave again. But I'm not sure that would be too much of an issue in that situation. Marie, can you make an employee take holidays during furlough? Yes. Under the working time regulations, as long as you give an employee double the notice of the leave you want them to take. So if I want an employee to take 1 week's notice, I give them 1 week's leave. I give them 2 weeks notice that they're going to take 1 week's leave. I can do that. That's fine under the working time regulations, and there's nothing which says I can't do that. And the government guidance actually says that that's fine for us to do. And I think that's a really pragmatic approach for a business to take, because you don't want people to be coming back with big periods of leave. Hema, can you email clients a list of all the HSE stuff that helps returns to work? Yeah, I will be sending out information to the employees who are coming back to work about the risk assessments we'd done, about how the business was COVID secure, about how we'd adhered to all the health and safety guidelines, all the social distancing, all the cleaning, everything that needs to be done from a risk assessment perspective. And for some businesses, this is quite complex and it really differs between businesses as well. So yes, I'll be explaining that to them. And what we're advising businesses to do as well is to have a nice outline to the employees, a document which says this is what the rules are, this is what we expect of you and your back as well. Because one thing that I'm not getting asked a question on here, but maybe with your businesses returning, having not returned yet, some of the questions we're getting off other clients this week is we've had employees of businesses who've either recklessly or purposely disregarded the health and safety rules that have been put in place by a business, increasing the chance of the virus being contracted. So what do we do with those employees? Well, it depends on the documents. And we're putting into documents that are working with clients about that health and safety breaches, what we can do with that under a disciplinary process, setting out to them from their risk assessment, this is what we do for you, this is what we've set up. And if they don't follow this is the next thing that happens. And talking about disciplining those employees as well. So yeah, I think it's good to let them know exactly what the rules are as well and what you expect them when they come back to work. I think that's essential. Okay, Lisa, this is a fantastic question. On the part-time scheme, are we able to request staff to come back for a number of hours per day rather than full days and still be able to claim the hours they're not working? That was my exact question the second that the scheme got launched by the Chancellor. That was my question straight away. Great, he gave an example of an employee coming back 2 days and working 3. But the example that I've given in sessions before that I thought would have worked quite nicely would have been, what about employees coming back 5 days a week, but for the morning, or 5 days a week, and another employee coming back 5 days a week for the afternoon? What about if we thought about it like that to get employees into a bit more of a routine of attending work every day? And think that we've got, as business owners here, we've got a situation where we need to also be thinking about the staff and the performance of the staff and people who've been off for 10, 12, even more weeks as we get back. What are we going to do with those staff? Let's get them trained before they come back in, and that's why we utilise that training. Let's get them trained, let's get them ready to come back in. But also thinking about, can they work part-time days? And I thought that would have been a really nice way of the scheme working, to give a few part-time days and more days in the office rather than just bulk days. And that's something I always look at as well when you think about somebody who's on a period of long-term sickness absence and returning from work. You do a phased return to work with that employee. But what works well with that phased return is, rather than doing 2 full days, Monday, Tuesday, and then they're detached and away from the office Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, then they're back in Monday. What I always prefer to do is a half day Monday, a half day Tuesday, take Wednesday off, half day Thursday, half day Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then they're into the routine with more. They're in the office 4 of the 5 days then a week, not for the full time. I think that would work really well. And I'm sure that when we get to the 12th, at least we're going to get clarification on how that works as well. But as it stands now, we don't know. As it stands now, the Chancellor only spoke about full days when he did the update, so we don't know how that's going to look. But I would like to see that in there myself. I think that would be a good solution to businesses. One of the things you've got to think about as a business here, though, is how you're going to record this. And this is something that is we've been helping a lot of clients with. We have a piece of software here called Bright HR that records everything for a business. It sets out, we've got Furlough Navigator in there. It sets out everything that they've got and records that time. And you need to pull that off and to submit that. And that's where the HMRC are interested about fraud. They're interested about misclaiming of hours. They were thinking about that before with the furlough scheme, but it's much more straightforward when my employees are just off. They're just off for 3-week blocks and let them off for the whole period in one go. Well, now there's going to be different rotas, different start times. Some days are furloughed, some days are not. Not the same day on every week's going to be furloughed. If we can do part days, double that complication as well. One of the things in the piece of advice I've been giving to business owners is have a real think about your system that you have to record that. If you've got a wall chart in your office and you write on that, you've got an Excel spreadsheet to do that, you're probably going to struggle. You're probably going to struggle to make sure that's right, and think about what piece of software you've got that helps you handle that as well. And that's something that's going to be coming back to be really complicated for employers as well. Okay, John, this is a really good question. So, as a director, are you allowed to carry out statutory duties relating to health and safety? environmental health and food standards, duties relating to your operating food premises. This include upgrading, painting, deep cleaning, etc. So, Treasury Direction. Got the Treasury Direction here with me, and the Treasury Direction sets out what a director can do. And think about the classification here: is that you can't work. That's rule number one. You can't work and claim under the job retention scheme. That's going to change in July. But as it stands now, you can't work and claim under the scheme at all. You can't work 1 hour under the scheme and claim under it. So we've got some caveats here, some rules that apply just to directors, some exemptions just for directors to say this is what a director can do. So we had the original direction, which gave us two things that a director could do. And that was the filing of company accounts. And number two was providing information relating to the business to an administrator. So filing company accounts, communicating with an administrator, businesses in administration. They were the two things that we could do before. They've expanded that now. They've added to that in the Treasury Direction, which got updated a couple of weeks ago. The third thing you can do now is make a coronavirus job retention scheme claim in respect of an employee of the director's company, or make a payment of salary or wages to an employee of the director's company. 4 things that it sets out that we can do. Now, while what I think that you've put in there is perfectly reasonable, John, I think that ties in as well to the obligations that we have as a director to make sure that the building is health and safety compliant, that we've done our risk assessment, that we've got everything in place that I stressed the importance of before. Is that work, though? I would say that on a balance, probably not. However, I would always caveat that to say that be cautious, because the Treasury Direction is not specific about that. The Treasury Direction doesn't cover that. I would think you would likely be okay, but I would always think tread into that area knowing that you're carrying a certain amount of risk, that might be classified as work. We just haven't had that point clarified yet. We've only got these 4 points, and they're the 4 points that we're advising on. Okay, Hina, I've got a question here. So we've got an employee who we put on furlough at the beginning of April, and we wrote to them they'll receive full pay for the month of April and May. We could only confirm pay up to the end of May, as the scheme was only open to the end of May, which it was originally. It was a 3-month scheme originally, extended to 4 months, then extended to the end of October. However, in the letter we did say they will remain on furlough until the job retention scheme is open. We already have authorization for the CEO to pay full pay up to July. Do we have to write to them again stating that full pay for June and July? Can we say this verbally? Initially, when we sent them home due to work on the 24th of March, at the time there was no job retention scheme, we did tell the employees that we pay them 100% of wages for 4 months. This is a question that we're getting asked from a lot of businesses this week. Maybe not in those specifics, but very, very similar. And this is, I can't claim my 80% pay anymore, so I want to reduce this down. Or the job retention scheme has been extended for a little bit further than I thought it was going to be. It's going to affect my business for a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be. We can't keep affording to pay 100%. We thought that was a nice thing to do for the first 3 months, but we want to bring that down now. And then even more so, employees who are paying 100% think, well, it's going to be a point soon where I can only claim back 60%, and I'm paying 40 for that employee there. So I want to be able to bring that down in line with the government bringing that down. So this point is a point that appears quite complicated. And it's just to do with negotiation and agreement. I'll explain how this works. So first of all, we've got to agree one thing with any employee, which is that they're on furlough. They need to agree to that, and we need to clarify that to them in writing. That can be by email. Now, there was something that contradicted between the government guidance and the Treasury Direction, which said that the employee had to reply in writing to the Treasury Direction. We had to get something back from the employee. It's nice that that's been clarified now that we don't. We just have to send them something else in writing, but to confirm the agreement, you need to speak to the employees and to gain the agreement about this. So we agree to a period that they're on furlough. The second point to that, which is somewhat separate, is the pay that they get for that period. Now, an employer who chose the option of paying the employees 100% pay for that period, and that's their own decision for their own business reasons, they chose to take that option. They didn't need to agree anything with the employee, because the employee wasn't changing any term and condition of their contract of employment. The prime one in this situation is the pay. They weren't reducing any pay, they weren't reducing the wages that employee receives, so they didn't have to agree anything with them. If you as a business just reduce an employee's wages, it's a breach of contract. It's a fundamental breach of contract, could lead to them resigning and claiming constructive unfair dismissal. That's the risk. the coronavirus job retention scheme did not wipe that risk away. That risk still sits there in the background. You just need to make sure that you've agreed that with the employee, and that's how we deal with a contractual issue, is that you can change terms of a contract. Even before this, I could have had an employee on £30,000, and I say to them, I'd rather pay you £25,000 now, and they say, no problem, Paul. They sign an agreement, and their salary moves to £25,000. We can do that. That's fine. Offer and acceptance. We can do that. But it'd have been a problem if I'd have reduced that employee's pay just down to £25,000 and said, I've just reduced your pay. I don't think that I want to pay you £30,000 anymore. Well, they go, great. That's a fundamental breach of contract. I can resign and I can claim that I've been constructively unfairly dismissed. That was the risk we carried before. We carry exactly the same risk now. Don't think it being any different because we have the furlough schemes there as an option as well. It's no different as it was before. So if you got an employee who you were paying 100% pay to, and you want to reduce that employee down to 80% pay, you need to gain their agreement to reduce the wages that they receive down to 80% for that period. Speak to the employees, gain their agreement, confirm that agreement in writing with them. That's what we need to do. That's what we need to make sure that we've done. And we've got a lot of employees actually thinking this because they thought, I really do want to make sure that my employees are looked after as well as I can, and I'm going to pay them 100%. But this scheme's gone on for longer than I think a lot of people expected, and that's meant that people now need to revise the payment that's gone to employees. Okay, so we'll just do a last question from Margaret. Thought I'd been clearer than this. Sorry, totally confused. Had intended to bring a member of staff onto furlough on the 6th of June and bring someone off to take her place. I think you're asking, is that okay, and can I refurlough both of those people? Probably. Are they still an option to refurlough? That's probably what the rest of that is. So I'll be just to clarify this. You can rotate staff. That's fine. You can rotate staff as long as it complies with the rules of furlough, that they don't work, minimum period of 3 weeks due to the coronavirus situation. So we can do that. We can rotate staff. If you've got a member of staff, though, you've got two people here, two individuals, and you only want one of them to be on furlough as of the 10th, and you want one of them to be off furlough as of the 10th. The point that I made before is that it might be okay for both of these employees. So as long as you've got an employee who is in some way being furloughed for 3 weeks before the 10th, or before the 30th, really, because the 10th is the day. The reason why the 10th is important, because that gives you 3 weeks until the 30th to be able to people to accrue the time to hit the second part of the test. But as long as by the 30th that you've got somebody who has been furloughed for a minimum period of 3 weeks in any format under the job retention scheme, you might be okay to say in future, I'm going to put that employee down onto part-time hours, I'm going to reduce their hours, I'm going to give them other options of how we're going to do it and take advantage of the new, more flexible scheme. However, the government guidance is not clear on that point. And the point that I'm talking about when I'm advising businesses here is that if you want the safest option, for me, you would have everybody who you want to use on the job retention scheme fully furloughed on the 10th. That not someone who's back and we can say, oh, they were furloughed a few months ago, can I claim for them? The purpose of this scheme and thinking, the reason why I give that advice is whenever interpreting legislation like this, which at first appears somewhat unclear, we are going to get clarification on the 12th, but it's 2 days too late. That is to think about the spirit in which this was agreed, and the spirit of this is to get businesses back to work. The spirit of this is to help people who are on furlough to taper them back into work. The spirit of this is not for people who haven't been furloughed or aren't on furlough to get them onto a part-time furlough if they're already working their full-time hours. That's not the spirit of it. Now it might be that we're allowed to do that if we had someone furloughed earlier in the year. That might be okay, but there's a risk attached to that as a business. And the safest option is to know that you've got somebody who's on furlough on the 10th. They're on furlough for the period of time that the 12th comes and we get that clarification on the guidance, and they're going to be on furlough for the 30th, and then we can look at bringing them back on a more part-time basis. So I hope that point just clarifies everything. 1 second. I hope that point just clarifies exactly what we can do with an employee, what we can do with a period when they're on furlough. So when we come back next week, we'll have more clarification on how this works. We'll have an update on the new rules as well. But as I said before, a lot of people have been getting in touch with us after these sessions saying, can you have a look at my business? Can you help me a bit more with what's going on within my business? Can I ask a couple more questions? Can I get a bit more guidance around this? It's absolutely no problem. That's fine. The phone number to call us on is 0800 046 3179. and the website address is krona.co.uk/FB Live. I hope the session's been good for people today, and I hope people have got a good understanding of what is very complicated legislation and guidance when it comes to actually implementing this into your business and how that's going to work. So see people next week, and we'll have some really good information for you then. Goodbye.